So I want you to imagine putting a 14-year-old boy inside a massive stadium.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. And you surround him with like tens of thousands of just absolutely screaming
It's
fans.
just terrifying for anyone, let alone a kid.
Exactly. And then you broadcast his image to millions of televisions across the globe. You place him opposite grown men, I mean, seasoned, hardened professional athletes who are, physically peaking.
Right.
And then you tell that 14-year-old that the pride, the joy, and the immediate emotional well-being of his entire nation rests entirely on how well he swings a piece of wood at a projectile traveling 90 miles an hour.
It's a scenario that sounds a lot closer to a psychological experiment than a sporting event, honestly.
Okay.
The cognitive load alone would paralyze most adults.
But it actually happened. It's a fully documented historical fact. And it's just one of thousands of bizarre, extreme, and hyper-specific data points we are exploring today.
I am so excited for this one.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. We are thrilled you're here with us. Today, we're looking at a stack of sources that, if you just glanced at the cover, might seem like the driest reading material imaginable.
Oh, absolutely.
We are dissecting a compilation text that was originally titled Comprehensive Indian Competitive Exam Practice and Analysis.
To anyone who has ever crammed for a standardized test, that title probably induces a mild panic attack.
Yeah, a little bit of PTSD there.
Right, because it implies a textbook designed purely for rote memorization. Just an endless conveyor belt of dates, names, geographical trivia, and scientific definitions.
It is the ultimate flashcard fodder. But, our mission today is to rescue these facts from the flashcards.
I like that.
Because when you stop looking at this text as just some hurdle you have to jump over to get a job and start looking at it as a curated document of human priorities, it completely transforms.
It really does. It becomes a mirror, in a way.
Exactly. This study guide is actually a disguised, sweeping roadmap of human history and civilization. We're going to travel from the literal birth of the cosmos, zoom all the way down into the microscopic intricacies of human biology.
It covers so much ground.
It does. We're going to explore the foundation of ancient trade networks and ultimately arrive at the forging of modern geopolitical boundaries and, ballistic missiles.
And I think the curation itself is the story here.
What do you mean?
Well, the fact that a society sits down and decides, out of all the infinite knowledge in the universe, that a citizen absolutely must know the tilt of a specific planet,
Right.
or the exact temperature of a biological process, and the specific names of local insurgents from a century ago, that reveals our collective DNA.
Yeah, it tells us what we actually believe is fundamental to understanding our place in reality.
Exactly.
So let's start with that reality, because before we can even talk about humans drawing imaginary lines on a map or, playing games, we have to establish the stage we're playing on.
The biggest stage possible.
Yes. The source text begins its journey at the absolute macro level, which is cosmology. And the text formally defines it as the study of the origin, structure, evolution, and ultimate fate of the universe.
And breaking down the etymology provides a really beautiful framing for our whole discussion today.
Oh, lay it on me.
So the text notes it comes from the Greek cosmos, meaning the ordered universe, and logos, meaning the study or the word.
The ordered universe.
Right. It's the ultimate, largest possible scale of human inquiry.
But, look at the ambition in that definition. The ultimate fate of the universe.
That's quite a goal.
It really is. I mean, it's one thing for early humans to look up and track the movement of the stars just to know when to plant crops.
Sure, practical applications.
But it is an entirely different level of intellectual hubris to sit on this tiny rock and attempt to calculate how reality itself will end.
Hubris is the perfect word for it, honestly.
Oh.
But it's a necessary hubris.
How so?
Because it reveals a fundamental cognitive leap in our species. We aren't satisfied with merely surviving in the house we were born in. We want the blueprints.
Exactly. We demand to know the architectural blueprints of the house, who poured the foundation, and precisely what year the roof is going to cave in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Whether cosmology points toward the big crunch, where gravity pulls everything back into a singularity, or the heat death, where the universe expands until all energy is uniformly dissipated into a frozen void.
Both of which sound incredibly bleak, by the way.
Very bleak. But the fact that we try to model these outcomes shows our desperate need for a narrative structure. We just need a beginning, a middle, and an end.
And while we are constantly searching for that neat, orderly narrative, the universe often replies with utter chaos.
It really does.
Which perfectly leads me to a detail in the text that completely shatters the idea of a perfectly synchronized cosmos.
Oh, the rolling planet.
Yes, the guide explicitly requires you to know about a bizarre quirk in our own solar system. It highlights the planet Uranus, and it refers to it as the rolling planet.
It is a phenomenal disruption of the celestial clockwork. It's so weird, because I always pictured the solar system like one of those brass mechanical models you see in museums, like, the orreries.
Right, where everything is spinning so neatly.
Exactly. The planets act like spinning tops, staying mostly upright on their axes as they travel in their concentric circles around the sun. But the text mandates that we know Uranus tilts at an almost 98-degree angle on its axis.
It's essentially lying on its side.
Yeah. As it orbits the sun, it isn't spinning like a top at all. It is rolling along its orbital path like a bowling ball rolling down a lane.
The visual of that is hilarious.
Oh, it really is. But why is this specific anomaly so important that it makes it into a highly competitive exam? What does a sideways planet actually tell us?
It tells us about the violent reality of the early universe.
Oh, so it wasn't always like that.
No, not at all. The current scientific consensus, the actual why behind that 98-degree tilt, isn't that Uranus formed that way naturally.
Okay.
Planetary formation models suggest it should have been relatively upright, just like the others.
So what happened?
The prevailing theory is that early in the solar system's history, a massive protoplanet, perhaps twice the size of Earth, violently collided with Uranus.
Wait, well, just a massive hit and run.
Cosmic hit and run, yeah. The sheer kinetic energy of that impact knocked an entire gas giant completely on its side, permanently altering its rotation and its magnetic field.
So we essentially study it because it's a cosmic crime scene.
Precisely. We look up and see the predictable orbit, but that 98-degree tilt is a massive glowing scar.
Wow.
It reminds us that our search for order in cosmology has to account for catastrophic, system-breaking events.
Because the universe wasn't engineered in some sterile laboratory.
No, it was forged in a demolition derby.
That is a great way to put it. And yet, we can only perceive that demolition derby through a very narrow, highly specific biological mechanism.
Right, our eyes.
Exactly. We observe the cosmos through light, so the source text transitions from the vastness of space to the strict rules of how we see it, focusing on the theory of light.
And it zeroes in on the primary colors.
Yeah. It states that red, green, and blue are the primary colors.
The RGB color model. This is actually where we bridge the gap between the physics of the universe and the engineering of modern human life.
And the text explicitly notes two things about these RGB colors. They occur naturally, and they cannot be created by mixing other colors together.
Which is a very important point to clarify.
Yeah, I think we need to clarify this for anyone who remembers mixing finger paints in kindergarten, right?
Because we were all taught the primary colors were red, yellow, and blue.
Exactly. So what's the difference here?
That is a crucial distinction. What you learned in kindergarten was subtractive color mixing.
Subtractive.
Yeah, working with pigments, dyes, or paints.
Yeah.
In that physical world, materials absorb or subtract certain wavelengths of light and reflect others.
Oh, I see.
If you mix all the paint colors together, you get a muddy, dark brown or black because you are subtracting almost all the light.
Right, it just turns into a mess.
But the text is talking about additive color mixing, the actual physics of light itself.
So how does that actually work in our biology? Like, why these three specific colors, red, green, and blue?
It all comes down to the microscopic architecture of the human eye.
Okay, break that down for me.
Inside your retina, you have these photoreceptor cells called cones. Humans generally have three types of cones, and they are respectively sensitive to short, medium, and long wavelengths of light.
And those correspond to the colors.
Exactly. Short wavelengths correspond to what we perceive as blue, medium to green, and long to red.
That's fascinating.
So the entire spectrum of visual reality that you experience is really just your brain calculating the varied stimulation of those three specific receptors.
Wow. So the universe throws this massive spectrum of electromagnetic radiation at us, but our biological hardware essentially operates on just a three-channel input.
A strict three-channel input. And that biological limitation is exactly what allowed us to invent the modern digital world.
Because we learned how to trick it.
Exactly. The text notes that by mixing these three primary colors, red, green, and blue light in varying proportions, we create absolutely every other color seen on television and mobile screens.
Think about the screen you might be looking at right now,
Yeah. your phone or your monitor.
You're watching a high-definition video of a vibrant sunset or a deep space photograph from the James Webb Telescope, and it looks like a continuous, infinite spectrum of color.
But it's a magnificent optical illusion.
It really is. The engineers who built your screen didn't invent a way to project a million different colors.
No, that would be impossible.
They just built millions of microscopic clusters of red, green, and blue LEDs. They figured out how to perfectly hack the biological receptors in your retina.
We took a fundamental physical law of the cosmos, the electromagnetic spectrum, and combined it with our anatomical limitations to build pocket-sized digital universes.
I love that. We didn't defy nature, we harnessed its constraints perfectly.
Exactly.
And harnessing nature's constraints brings us right to our next massive leap in the source material.
We're moving from the macro to the micro now.
Right, because we've established how we perceive the universe, but perceiving it isn't enough. The universe is actively hostile.
It wants to kill us.
It really does. To build a civilization, humans had to figure out how to stop the microscopic world from killing us.
We transitioned from astrophysics and optics into the brutal battlefield of microbiology.
The text introduces the French scientist Louis Pasteur and the revolutionary process named after him, which is pasteurization.
A total game changer for human survival.
It defines it as a process used to destroy harmful microorganisms in milk and other beverages to increase shelf life. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Humans have controlled fire for hundreds of thousands of years, right?
Sure.
We knew that cooking meat stopped us from getting sick. So why does Pasteur get his name in the history books for essentially figuring out that you should heat up milk?
Because the mechanics of what he achieved go far beyond simply throwing something on a fire. If you just boil milk on a stove until you are absolutely certain everything inside it is dead, you haven't just killed the pathogens, you've ruined the milk.
Right, it gets that weird gross skin on top.
It does, and it tastes scorched. You've fundamentally denatured the proteins.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you've destroyed the nutritional profile. It becomes a different, vastly inferior product. Pasteurization is not sterilization.
What's the difference?
Sterilization is a carpet bombing strategy that wipes out everything. Pasteurization is a targeted surgical strike.
A surgical strike on milk, I like that.
The science, which the text really emphasizes, involves finding the exact thermal threshold.
Like a specific temperature.
Yes. For example, heating milk to 72 degrees Celsius for exactly 15 seconds, and then executing a rapid immediate cooling process.
Okay, wait. What does the rapid cooling actually do? Why is the drop in temperature just as important as the heat?
Because the heat is designed to kill the active vegetative bacteria, the pathogens like E. coli or Salmonella that cause immediate illness.
Okay, so the heat handles the immediate threat.
Right. However, some bacteria can form protective spores that actually survive that initial heat.
Sneaky.
Very. If you let the milk cool down slowly, those spores sense that the environment is returning to a comfortable warm state.
Oh, no.
And they germinate and multiply all over again. The rapid cooling shocks the liquid down to a temperature where those surviving spores remain completely dormant.
So Pasteur didn't just apply heat. He mapped the precise thermal weaknesses of microscopic life.
He really did.
He found the exact cheat code to hack the biological decay process. You preserve the food, you preserve the nutrients, but you disarm the biological time bomb inside it.
And the implications for human civilization are just staggering.
Because we could finally store food.
Exactly. Before pasteurization, cities were tethered to their immediate agricultural surroundings.
Right, because it would rot before it got there.
You couldn't transport milk over long distances without it becoming a deadly vector for tuberculosis or typhoid.
That is terrifying.
By engineering this thermal hack, Pasteur decoupled human population centers from the immediate constraints of food spoilage.
It allowed for the massive, dense urbanization that defines the modern era.
You cannot have a megacity if the food supply poisons the population before it reaches the center.
That makes perfect sense. But, securing the perimeter against external microbes is only half the battle.
We also have to maintain the complex machinery inside our own bodies.
Which naturally leads to the text's inclusion of the most universal metric of human health.
Blood pressure.
Blood pressure, the mechanical rhythm of life. The study guide states that the standard healthy human blood pressure is 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury.
Right.
Now, we have all sat on the crinkly paper in a doctor's office and heard those numbers.
Oh, yeah, the cold stethoscope.
Exactly. But let's actually unpack the mechanics. Let's start with the numbers themselves, 120 over 80.
Those two numbers represent the dual nature of your cardiovascular pump.
Okay, so what's the 120?
The 120 is your systolic pressure. This is the moment of maximum violence in the system.
Maximum violence.
It really is. It is the peak pressure exerted against the endothelial lining of your arteries when the heart muscle actively contracts and forces oxygen-rich blood out into your body.
So the systolic is the active aggressive phase.
Yes. It has to be powerful enough to push fluid against gravity all the way up to your brain and all the way down to your toes.
Okay, and the 80?
The 80, the diastolic pressure, is arguably just as critical, though maybe less intuitive.
Why is it so critical?
This is the pressure in your arteries during the brief moment your heart muscle relaxes and the chambers refill with blood.
You know, I always picture it like municipal plumbing.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. The systolic is when the massive central pump at the water treatment plant kicks on, forcefully shoving water through all the underground mains.
Exactly.
And the diastolic is the residual pressure that remains in the pipes when the pump pauses for a split second.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Because you need constant pressure in the system, even during the resting phase, or else the pipes collapse and the higher elevations lose water immediately.
Yes. If the diastolic pressure drops too low, the system loses its tension.
And if it's too high?
If it stays too high, the pipes are constantly under siege, even at rest. This leads to microscopic tears in the arterial walls where plaque can begin to build up.
Wow. So it's a delicate, lifelong balancing act of fluid dynamics.
It really is incredible when you think about it.
But the detail in the tech that fascinates me the most is the unit of measurement, millimeters of mercury.
Hg.
The text notes the tool used to measure this is a sphygmomanometer.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
Right. But seriously, why mercury? Why are we measuring the complex biological pressure of the human heart against a toxic liquid metal from the periodic table?
It comes down to pure physics and the ingenuity of early medical engineering.
Okay, walk me through it.
The original sphygmomanometers were quite literally glass tubes filled with fluid.
Just simple tubes.
Yeah. When the cuff around your arm inflates to cut off the blood flow and then slowly deflates, the doctor listens for the first sound of blood pushing through. That's the systolic.
And then the sound disappears for the diastolic.
Exactly. But they needed a way to visually measure the pressure pushing against the cuff.
Why not just use water in the glass tube? It seems a lot safer than mercury.
Because of density, mercury is roughly 13.6 times denser than water.
Oh, wow.
If you used a column of water to measure typical human blood pressure, the glass tube would have to be incredibly tall.
Like how tall?
Almost impractical to keep in a doctor's office. You'd need a tube several feet high just to read a normal pressure.
That's hilarious, just a 6-foot water tube in the exam room.
Right. But because mercury is so dense, a relatively small, compact column of it is heavy enough to offer the necessary resistance to human blood pressure.
It's incredible. We use the dense physical properties of a heavy metal forged in dying stars to calibrate and measure the internal plumbing of our own bodies.
We are entirely tethered to the physics of the universe.
We really are. So if we pull back for a moment, we understand the cosmos, we've mastered our perception of light, we've hacked our food supply to prevent decay, and we are monitoring the delicate fluid dynamics of our cardiovascular system.
We are surviving.
We're surviving. But once a civilization secures its survival to this degree, what happens next?
You generate a massive surplus of human energy.
Right, because we aren't just hunting and gathering anymore.
Exactly. When every waking hour is no longer dedicated solely to avoiding starvation or disease, humanity requires a new outlet.
We invent the arena.
Yes.
We invent structured competition. The text takes us directly from the preservation of the body to the testing of the body's limits. The modern Olympic Games.
The ultimate global theater of organized physical conflict.
The guide highlights Pierre de Coubertin, identifying him as the French father of modern Olympic Games.
The very important figure.
It notes he founded the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, in 1894, and that just 2 years later, in 1896, the first modern Olympics were held in Athens, Greece.
Moving very fast.
But Coubertin wasn't just, like, a sports fan who wanted to see people run fast, right? What was the actual philosophical drive behind this massive undertaking?
You really have to look at the geopolitical context of the late 19th century to understand him.
Okay, paint the picture.
Coubertin was operating in a world that was rapidly industrializing. Empires were deeply fractured, and Europe had recently seen significant conflict, including the Franco-Prussian War, which deeply affected him.
So there was a lot of tension.
A lot. He originally wanted to just improve the physical culture and discipline of French youth, but his vision expanded radically.
How so?
He looked back at antiquity and saw the ancient Greek tradition of the Olympic truce.
What was the truce?
It was a period where warring city-states would literally lay down their arms to compete athletically.
Wow. So he viewed sports as a diplomatic tool.
Exactly. He believed that if you brought the youth of the world together on a standardized playing field, stripping away their military uniforms and replacing them with athletic gear, you could foster a mutual respect that boardroom diplomacy could never achieve.
That is surprisingly optimistic for that era.
It was. The founding of the IOC in 1894 was a desperate, hopeful gamble.
To stop the fighting.
Yes. It was an attempt to channel the innate human instinct for tribalism, dominance, and conquest into a formalized, non-lethal structure.
It is the ultimate domestication of our aggressive instincts. You trade the battlefield for the track.
Precisely.
But the text doesn't just focus on the global stage, It shifts to the importance of regional identity through sports, bringing up the Asian Games.
Also known as the Asiad.
Right. The text points out that these games occur every 4 years, and it anchors this with a specific piece of trivia. The first Asian Games were held in New Delhi, India, in 1951.
A very specific year to note.
It also notes the supervision by the Olympic Council of India. So what is the significance of establishing this regional competition right in the middle of the 20th century?
The year 1951 is the absolute key to understanding the Asian Games.
Why is that?
Think about the globe at that moment. The devastating trauma of the Second World War had recently concluded.
Right. The world was rebuilding.
But more importantly for this region, the era of massive European colonialism in Asia was actively crumbling. India had just achieved independence in 1947.
Oh, wow. So this is right on the heels of independence.
Exactly. So hosting these games was less about the sports and more about a geopolitical debut.
They were throwing a coming out party.
Precisely. The first Asian Games in New Delhi wasn't just an athletic competition. It was a loud, organized assertion of post-colonial identity.
It was newly independent nations coming together to say, we are no longer just subjects of empires.
Yes. We are autonomous states capable of organizing, funding, and executing a massive bureaucratic and logistical undertaking on our own terms.
And the mention of the Olympic Council of India highlights the sheer administrative architecture required.
It's massive. Building the stadiums, establishing the rules, managing the delegations, it is basically a rehearsal for managing a modern, complex state.
It's fascinating how sports act as the proxy for statecraft.
It really is.
And yet, inside these massive administrative machines, the text forces us to look at the extreme individual human experience.
Oh, the prodigies?
Yes. It details the astonishing records of the absolute youngest players to ever debut on the international stage, specifically in cricket.
This is where the macro scale of global sports crashes into the micro scale of human development.
The study guide gives us 2 mind-bending statistics. First, Pakistan's Hassan Raza, who debuted in a test match against Zimbabwe in 1996.
And how old was he?
He was 14 years and 227 days old.
Unbelievable.
And then it contrasts this with a very recent record from July 2026 by Bhav Suryavanshi, who debuted for India at just 15 years and 99 days old.
Wow.
We talked about this at the very beginning of the deep dive, but we really need to dig into the biomechanics and the psychology here.
It is a profound anomaly in human performance.
How is it even possible biologically?
Well, from a purely biomechanical standpoint, the sport of test cricket requires peak physical endurance, fast-twitch muscle responses, and immense spatial awareness.
Which kids usually don't have.
Right. The human brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which handles complex decision-making and risk assessment, is nowhere near fully developed at age 14 or 15.
That's the part that terrifies me.
The psychological aspect.
Yeah. The amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear and anxiety, is highly active during adolescence.
It's basically an overdrive.
I cannot fathom the psychological architecture required for a 14-year-old brain to stand at the crease, facing a fast bowler, hurling a hard leather ball at their head, knowing that millions of people in their home country are judging their every twitch.
It requires a level of neuroplastic adaptation that is almost frightening.
Seriously.
These individuals haven't just trained their muscles. They have somehow insulated their psyches against the level of pressure that routinely crushes adult professionals.
So when the text lists these ages, it isn't just celebrating a sports record.
No, not at all.
It is forcing us to confront the absolute outer limits of human mental fortitude. It asks the question, at what point does exceptional talent outpace natural biological development?
It's the ultimate pressure test of the human machine.
It really is. But to build these stadiums, to host these international games, and to manage the populations that produce these prodigies, humans had to build highly complex environments.
We need infrastructure.
Exactly. We have to transition from the arena to the architecture of civilization itself. We have to talk about cities.
The literal blueprint of society.
The source material starts our urban exploration at the roots of antiquity, introducing us to Baghdad, the capital of Iraq.
A deeply historical city.
And it emphasizes a geographical detail. It is situated on the banks of the Tigris River. It describes Baghdad as a crucial center for ancient Islamic civilization and trade.
Because geography is destiny when it comes to ancient urban planning.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the Tigris River wasn't just a convenient place to get a drink of water or, wash your clothes.
Right, it's not just a large plumbing fixture.
Not at all.
Okay.
Before the invention of combustion engines, moving massive amounts of goods over land was incredibly slow, dangerous, and prohibitively expensive.
Right, you're relying on carts and animals.
Exactly. So a river like the Tigris acted as a massive natural conveyor belt.
Oh, that makes sense.
When Caliph al-Mansur founded Baghdad in the 8th century, designing it as this magnificent circular city, he intentionally placed it near the Tigris to plug directly into the arterial network of the Silk Road.
So the geography essentially weaponized their economic potential.
Exactly. The river brought grain from the north, spices from the east, and textiles from the south.
It was a hub.
It allowed the city to become a cultural and intellectual crucible. The House of Wisdom flourished there because ideas, translated texts, and scholars physically flowed down the river along with the merchants.
So the river was the mechanism that allowed an isolated settlement to scale into a global superpower of antiquity.
Precisely.
But the text immediately juxtaposes this ancient river-based scaling with the realities of modern Indian metropolises.
Comparing the giants.
Yes. And it uses a brilliant dual metric system to examine how cities grow when space becomes an issue. It defines the largest city in two completely contradictory ways.
Population versus area, the two fundamental vectors of urban sprawl.
The guide states that by population, Mumbai in Maharashtra is the largest, appropriately dubbed the financial capital of India.
Right.
But by sheer area, Delhi is the largest. Let's break down the mechanics of why these two titans developed so differently.
It comes back to that phrase, geography as destiny.
How does that apply to Mumbai?
Look at the topography of Mumbai. It was originally an archipelago of 7 islands.
Really? Just islands?
Yeah. Over centuries, immense engineering projects reclaimed the land, fusing those islands together. But Mumbai is still fundamentally a peninsula, constrained by the Arabian Sea.
Oh, so it's trapped.
It cannot expand endlessly outward. When a city is a powerful economic magnet but geographically trapped, it has only one direction to go.
Up. It builds vertically.
It builds up, and it builds incredibly dense.
Because land is at a premium.
Land becomes the most precious commodity, forcing millions of people into high-rise apartments, tight alleyways, and incredibly congested transit systems. The density breeds a very specific, rapid, highly transactional culture.
Whereas Delhi has a completely different geographic reality.
Exactly. Delhi is situated on the massive, relatively flat expanse of the Indo-Gangetic Plain.
So it has room to breathe.
Historically had the luxury of land. Therefore, as its population grew, it didn't need to force everyone into a tiny vertical footprint. It swallowed the surrounding landscape.
It built out. It sprawled.
This horizontal expansion creates a completely different urban psychology.
Like longer commutes.
Longer commutes, distinct satellite cities like Gurgaon or Noida, and a different distribution of municipal resources entirely.
It's fascinating how the physical constraints of just dirt and water completely dictate the daily rhythm of millions of lives.
It really does.
But the study guide doesn't just care about the behemoths. It deliberately shifts our focus to the microscale of political administration, highlighting Goa and Sikkim.
The contrast there is jarring, but necessary for a complete picture.
The text points out that Goa is the smallest state in India, managing with the absolute fewest districts, only 2, North Goa and South Goa.
Just 2 districts.
And Sikkim follows closely behind with just 6 districts. Why does this administrative trivia matter in the grand scheme of statecraft?
Because it illustrates that governance is not a one-size-fits-all mechanism.
Right.
Governing a sprawling megacity like Delhi requires a massive, multi-layered bureaucracy just to manage waste disposal and traffic.
It's a logistical nightmare.
But a state with only 2 districts represents a profound intimacy of administration.
Intimacy.
Yeah, the distance between the average citizen and the highest level of state authority is incredibly short.
Oh, I see. You're much closer to the decision makers.
Exactly. It suggests a political reality where local issues are essentially state issues. The administrative structure is dictated by the physical footprint, resulting in a unique form of hyper-localized governance that would collapse instantly if applied to Mumbai.
Okay, so we have the ancient river trade hubs, the dense vertical financial capitals, the sprawling horizontal megacities, and these tiny, intimate two-district states.
It's a vast spectrum.
How does a civilization physically bind these totally distinct realities together?
You need a technological paradigm shift that conquers distance.
You need the railroad.
You need the train.
Which brings us to a hyper-specific date in the text, April 16th, 1853, the introduction of India's first passenger train.
A date that fundamentally rewired the entire subcontinent.
The text notes this happened during Lord Dalhousie's era. The train traveled a distance of roughly 34 kilometers from Mumbai's Boribandar to Thane.
A relatively short trip by today's standards.
Right, but the detail that absolutely jumps off the page is the naming convention.
I love this detail.
The text insists we know that this train was powered by 3 distinct steam engines, and they were named Sindh, Sultan, and Sahib.
That specific detail, the naming, is incredibly rich with historical subtext.
It really is. Today, we might know the model number of an airplane we fly on, but we don't name individual train engines.
No, we don't.
Naming these massive iron machines Sindh, Sultan, and Sahib, it evokes the tradition of naming legendary warships or royal cavalry horses. Why give a piece of industrial equipment a title of nobility or authority?
Because in 1853, these machines were viewed as literal conquerors of the landscape.
Oh, wow.
You have to view this through the lens of the British East India Company and the imperial administration of Dalhousie.
Okay, so what was their angle?
The railways weren't just a polite public transport initiative. They were the physical manifestation of imperial control.
They were tools of empire.
Exactly. They allowed for the rapid movement of troops, the extraction of raw materials, and the centralization of authority.
So by naming them Sultan and Sahib titles of local reverence and power, the British were almost playfully asserting their new industrial dominance over the traditional power structures.
Spot on. The steam engine was the new, undisputed ruler of the geography.
It shattered the previous limitations of human movement.
Think about it. A 34-kilometer journey that might have taken a grueling, multi-day trek through difficult terrain could now be achieved in an afternoon while sitting on a bench.
It standardized time, it bridged previously isolated cultures, and it physically bolted the immense geography of India together with iron.
But bolted iron tracks are not enough to make a nation.
No, they aren't.
You can physically connect Mumbai to Thane and eventually the whole country. But physical proximity doesn't create a unified identity.
So what does?
To forge a modern state out of millions of disparate people, you need a shared narrative. You need shared friction.
You need the catalyst of resistance.
Exactly.
Which leads the study guide directly into the crucible of 1857. However, instead of focusing on the broad, macro-historical narrative of the 1857 rebellion, the text drills down into a highly specific, localized event in Hyderabad.
A masterclass in the anatomy of a localized insurgency.
The text zeroes in on July 17, 1857. It details an attack on the British residency in the Koti area of Hyderabad.
And it names the specific leaders.
Yes, Turbos Khan and Malvi Alauddin. And it notes they led around 500 Rohilla soldiers into this fray. But the crucial detail, the why, is what really fascinates me.
It changes everything.
They didn't launch this assault based on a grand, abstract political treatise. The text explicitly states their motive was to free their imprisoned associate, Zamindar Chira Khan.
This specific fact forces us to completely reevaluate how we understand massive historical movements.
How so?
When we look back at 1857, we tend to impose a clean, unified narrative of a monolithic war of independence.
Right, like everyone was on exactly the same page.
But the reality on the ground was a chaotic mosaic of localized grievances.
The micro-loyalties driving the macro-rebellion.
Precisely. Consider those 500 Rohilla soldiers.
Who were they?
The Rohillas were largely of Afghan descent, known for a fierce martial tradition, often operating as mercenaries or private militias. When they marched on the British residency, which was a heavily fortified symbol of unequal power, and colonial oversight. They weren't necessarily fighting for the abstract concept of a unified Indian republic that wouldn't exist for another 90 years.
They were mobilized by visceral, immediate outrage.
Yes, their associate, a local leader, was locked up.
It was personal.
It was intensely personal. The mechanics of rebellion rely on this localized heat.
Grand political ideas might fan the flames, but the initial spark is almost always a micro-loyalty.
Exactly, a defense of community, family, or immediate associates.
The text demands we know about Chirakan because it teaches us that nations are forged not just by philosophical manifestos, but by the accumulation of thousands of deeply personal, violent struggles against authority.
That is exactly the takeaway.
Okay, so resistance provides the initial heat, but eventually a nation has to formalize its identity.
Right, you can't just rebel forever.
It has to agree on what it sounds like when it speaks with one voice.
It requires cultural consolidation. An anthem.
The source text transitions to the creation of the Indian national anthem, Jana Gana Mana, authored by the literary giant Rabindranath Tagore.
A brilliant artist.
It documents the exact moment of its first public performance, December 27, 1911, at the annual session of the Indian National Congress in Calcutta.
Tagore is a really fascinating figure in this context because his own views on nationalism were incredibly complex and often highly critical.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes, yet he produces the exact piece of art that will eventually unify the state.
But again, the study guide provides a deeply intimate detail about this monumental event.
A performer's.
Yes. It doesn't just say a massive choir sang it. It specifically notes that the song was first performed by Tagore's own niece, Sarala Devi Totarani, along with a group of school students.
Think about the trajectory of that piece of music.
It's mind-blowing.
Today, Jana Gana Mana is a sonic monolith. It is played by military bands, sung by billion-person populaces in stadiums, and broadcast across massive media networks.
It is the heaviest, most official sound of the state.
But its very first breath was taken in a much smaller room, sung by the author's niece.
It strips away all that historical mythology and grounds it in a deeply human moment.
It illustrates perfectly how cultural identity scales.
Right. An idea is born in a single mind, it is expressed by a family member, it is adopted by a political body like the Congress.
And decades later, it becomes the immutable law of the land.
But the law of the land has to apply to the actual land, right?
You need borders.
You can have the anthem, you can have the history of resistance, but if the physical borders aren't secure and unified, the state remains fractured.
Which brings us to Operation Polo.
One of the most intense mechanical actions of statecraft in the text. Operation Polo.
The brutal reality of geographical integration.
The text sets the scene in September 1948. India is independent, but the massive princely state of Hyderabad, ruled by the Nizam, had not acceded to the Union.
The map was incomplete.
Exactly. Operation Polo was the military action required to forcefully integrate Hyderabad. The guide notes the operation was led by Major General J.N. Chowdhury and that the Nizam's army surrendered.
But the military victory is really only half the story the text wants us to understand.
Right. The incredible detail is what happens the day after the surrender.
The transition of power.
The text states that after the victory, Major General J.N. Chowdhury became the first military governor of the Hyderabad state. I want to spend a moment analyzing the psychological whiplash of that career transition.
It is the ultimate test of leadership adaptability.
I mean, one day, as a major general, your entire cognitive framework is dedicated to destruction.
Absolutely.
Your job is to analyze enemy troop movements, coordinate artillery, break the opponent's supply lines, and achieve absolute tactical dominance over the territory. Your mindset is martial law and violence.
And then the enemy surrenders.
Suddenly, you are the military governor. Overnight, your job description completely flips.
You must pivot from destruction to preservation.
You have to make sure the garbage is collected. You have to ensure the local markets have food so the civilian population doesn't panic.
It's entirely different.
You have to integrate a deeply suspicious, newly conquered populace into the broader political union without sparking an immediate counterinsurgency.
The text highlights Chowdhury's dual role because it perfectly encapsulates the messy reality of forging a nation.
You use the sword to finalize the borders, but you immediately have to put the sword away and pick up the ledger to maintain the peace.
A military mind sees objectives and enemies. A governor must see citizens and compromises.
Managing that transition, preventing the military victory from becoming a civilian disaster, is the most fragile moment in the birth of a modern state.
And as we follow the timeline of our study guide, we learn that the messy work of drawing maps and forming identities doesn't stop just because the military operation is over.
No, the map keeps shifting.
Even within a unified nation, regional identities continue to mutate, chafe against the central authority, and demand recognition.
The internal borders are always in flux.
Exactly.
This brings us to a fascinating, highly detailed timeline provided in the text regarding the political history of Telangana. It acts as a time-lapse video of how a regional movement slowly grinds its way into becoming a physical state.
The Telangana movement is a perfect case study in the generational patience required for political evolution.
Where does it start?
To understand why it happened, you have to understand the historical friction. After Hyderabad was integrated, it was eventually merged with the Andhra state to form Andhra Pradesh in 1956.
Okay.
But the people of the Telangana region felt culturally distinct and economically marginalized by the political dominance of the coastal Andhra region.
So there was tension over resources.
Yes, there were deep grievances over water resources, budget allocations, and government employment.
So there is a simmering structural inequality driving the plot. The text starts its timeline way back in 1952, prior to the merger, looking at the Burgala Ramakrishna Rao cabinet. It lists specific personnel: Marichenna Reddy managing civil supplies, agriculture, and planning, and Pulchang Gandhi as education minister. Why is this 1952 baseline important to a movement that culminates in 2014?
Because it establishes the bureaucratic bedrock.
What do you mean?
The text is pointing out that long before you can agitate for a separate state, you must have a history of administrative competence.
Oh, you have to prove you can do it.
Exactly. Leaders like Marichenna Reddy were learning the granular mechanics of governance, how to manage food supplies, how to build an agricultural framework, how to fund schools.
So this 1952 cabinet proves that the region had the institutional memory and the capability to govern itself.
You can't demand the keys to a new car if you can't prove you know how an engine works.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so the foundation of competence is there. The text then aggressively fast-forwards us through decades of simmering tension to a crucial ignition point in the modern era. March 2004.
The TVV.
Yes, it details the formation of the Telangana Vidyavantula Vedika, the TVV, led by Professor M. Kodandaram.
This is the intellectual phase of the timeline, and it is arguably the most vital.
The text is very specific about the demographic of the TVV. It says they brought together intellectuals, teachers, and students to spread the ideology of a separate state.
Notice who isn't on that list.
They didn't bring together politicians or military leaders. Why start with professors and students?
Because political parties are often constrained by electoral math and immediate compromises.
They have to play the game.
Right. A true paradigm-shifting movement requires a robust philosophical architecture before it can survive the brutal arena of politics.
So you need the intellectuals to define the movement.
You need the intellectuals and professors to clearly articulate the historical injustices, to write the papers proving the economic disparity. You need the teachers to disseminate this narrative throughout the local culture.
And the students.
You need the students, particularly from institutions like Osmania University, to provide the fearless, boots-on-the-ground energy required for protests and mass mobilization.
So the TVV acted as the ideological engine that built a narrative so compelling, the politicians had absolutely no choice but to adopt it.
And the text shows how quickly that adoption happened.
It was fast. Just 2 months later, in May 2004, the Congress-led UPA-1 federal government officially included the Telangana issue in their Common Minimum Program, the CMP.
The intellectual theory breached the federal political reality.
The text notes the CMP promised to resolve the demand through broad-based consultations. The fringe movement was now an official agenda item in the capital.
The ball was officially rolling.
And then the text jumps us one final time to the culmination. 2014, the actual physical creation of the state of Telangana.
62 years after that 1952 cabinet.
The text circles back to the machinery of governance, mentioning the first KCR cabinet, specifically noting T. Padmarao Good as the first excise, prohibition, and sports minister.
When you lay it all out like that, from the agricultural planning in 1952 to the university professors organizing in 2004 to the swearing in of a sports minister in 2014, it is exhausting.
It reveals the sheer friction of changing a map.
It really does.
We live in an era where we expect software updates to change our lives overnight. But altering the geopolitical boundaries of millions of people, Requires a generational relay race.
It takes decades of administrative competence, intellectual rigor, mass protest, and excruciating political negotiation just to draw a new line on a map.
But once you draw that line, once you have your state, your anthem, your borders, and your identity, you have to protect it.
Because the world is still dangerous.
The world is still chaotic, much like that early solar system we talked about. How does a modern, fully realized state ensure its survival?
It has to master the physics of defense.
Which brings us to the final, sobering piece of our source material. The study guide introduces us to the Prithvi missile.
Named Prithvi, the Sanskrit word for Earth.
The text defines it as India's first fully indigenous surface-to-surface ballistic missile. It notes it was successfully test-fired on February 25, 1988, having been developed by the Defense Research and Development Organization, the DRDO.
There is a profound, almost tragic poetry to ending our journey here.
How so?
Think about the arc of this entire deep dive.
Okay.
We started by looking outward at the cosmos, marveling at the vastness of the universe, and attempting to study the ultimate fate of existence through cosmology.
Right.
We explored how humans hacked microbiology to preserve life, how we built massive cities for trade, and how we struggled to form cultural and political identities.
It's a long journey of progress.
And where does this grand timeline culminate? It culminates with us utilizing the most advanced physics, aerodynamics, and engineering possible, not to explore the stars, but to build a ballistic projectile designed to travel rapidly across the surface of our own planet.
Carrying the potential for massive destruction.
Exactly. Purely to defend the imaginary lines we spent centuries drawing.
We harness the power of the cosmos to threaten our neighbor.
Yes, but from a geopolitical perspective, the key word in the text definition is indigenous.
Why is that the key word?
The Prithvi missile was born out of the Integrated Guided Missile Development Program in the 1980s. Prior to this, developing nations were largely reliant on purchasing older military hardware from global superpowers.
So they were dependent. They had to ask permission to defend themselves.
Exactly. By successfully developing and testing a fully indigenous ballistic missile, the state is making the ultimate assertion of sovereignty.
It's independence on a technological level.
It is a nation declaring, we do not just have an anthem and a flag, we have mastered the highest levels of applied physics. We no longer rely on external empires for our security.
The missile is the final, terrifying capstone on the architecture of a modern state.
You evolve from 500 Rohilla soldiers attacking a residency with muskets in 1857 to a fully autonomous ballistic missile program in 1988.
It is a stark measurement of how the mechanics of power evolve.
It truly is.
Well, we have covered an unbelievable expanse of human knowledge today. We started by trying to decode a dry, rapid-fire study guide, and we found the blueprint of humanity hiding inside it.
We connected the micro to the macro.
We analyzed the cosmic violence that knocked Uranus into a 98-degree roll. We broke down the biological hardware of our retinas that turns red, green, and blue light into a digital reality.
We explored the exact thermal hacking Louis Pasteur used to conquer microbes.
And we examined the heavy fluid dynamics of measuring our 120/80 blood pressure with dense mercury.
We looked at the philosophical ambition of Pierre de Coubertin's 1896 Olympics and the geopolitical debut of the 1951 Asian Games.
We confronted the terrifying neuroplasticity required for a 14-year-old prodigy to survive international cricket. We contrasted the vertical density of Mumbai against the horizontal sprawl of Delhi and the intimacy of Goa's two-district governance.
We mapped the industrial conquest of geography with the 1853 steam engines Sindh, Sultan, and Sahib.
We unearthed the micro-loyalties driving the 1857 Hyderabad revolt, stood in the room when Tagore's niece first sang the national anthem, and analyzed the psychological whiplash of transitioning from military conqueror to civilian governor in Operation Polo.
We charted the grueling 60-year ideological and political marathon to create Telangana.
And finally, we looked at the ultimate assertion of lethal sovereignty with the 1988 Prithvi missile.
It is a breathtaking catalog of what humans are capable of achieving, organizing, and surviving.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought experiment based on the very nature of the document we've been reading today.
Okay, let's hear it.
I want you to imagine a historian, 1,000 years from now, digging through the digital ruins of our 21st century civilization.
A future archaeologist of data.
Exactly. Imagine that out of all our literature, all our art, and all our science, the only document that survives perfectly intact is this specific competitive exam practice and analysis guide.
That would be wild.
What would that historian conclude about our species?
Well, they would certainly see a species capable of vast intellect. But beneath the raw data, they would recognize a profound psychological obsession.
An obsession with cataloging.
Yes, they would see a creature desperate to measure and quantify every single variable of its existence.
We measure the exact millimeter of mercury pulsing in our veins to ensure we are alive.
We measure the precise degree of heat required to kill a microscopic threat.
We count the exact days of a 15-year-old's life when they step into an arena. We measure the square kilometers of our sprawling cities.
We log the exact dates our political boundaries shift.
And we even mathematically calculate the tilt of a gas giant billions of miles away.
We do it because the universe, fundamentally, is like that rolling planet. It is chaotic, violent, and indifferent.
And our defense mechanism against that chaos is measurement.
Perhaps that future historian would conclude that humanity's defining trait wasn't just our ability to survive the universe or our ability to build massive nations and indigenous missiles.
What would it be then?
Our defining trait was our relentless, desperate desire to impose order, to put a number on reality, to take the murky, terrifying vastness of existence and organize it into a clean, legible blueprint.
We measure the universe so we can convince ourselves we understand it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the map, keep looking for the connections, and we will see you next time.